Silence is worse. All truths that are kept silent become poisonous. Friedrich Nietzsche. We live in a world drowning in noise. From the constant pinging of phones, the flood of social media opinions, and the endless stream of chatter that fills our daily lives, silence has become rare, even feared. And yet, within that silence lies something incredibly powerful. Something Nietzsche understood deeply. Something that can transform not only the way you're perceived, but the very power you hold in the world. This is not about simply being quiet or passive. No, the silence Nietzsche points to, and the silence that gives you power, is calculated. It is intentional. It is a form of resistance, a method of asserting strength without words, and often without action. Silence, when used correctly, is not weakness. It is dominance. Nietzsche, known for his provocative, often challenging ideas, recognized that society tends to misunderstand the quiet individual. The silent one is often underestimated, until they are not. Because in silence, there is mystery, and mystery is powerful. So, let's explore the paradox. Why does something so passive as silence yield such active power? And how did Nietzsche, the philosopher of strength, will, and self-overcoming, see this hidden force as a tool of the few, the strong, and the wise? To understand this, we need to step into Nietzsche's world, a place where the individual is at war with the herd, where conformity is a sickness, and where the cultivation of one's inner self is the highest goal. Nietzsche's work constantly circles around the idea of power, not just power over others, but power over oneself. In his seminal work Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche introduces the concept of the Übermensch, the overman or superman. This isn't a hero with supernatural powers. It is an individual who has risen above the crowd, who has created their own values, and who no longer dances to the tune of society's expectations. The Übermensch does not need validation from others. And that's exactly why silence is key. Silence, in Nietzsche's philosophy, can be an act of independence. In a world obsessed with speaking, reacting, and being seen, choosing silence is a form of self-control. It says, I don't need to speak. I don't need to react. I am enough. And that's terrifying to those who rely on external validation. But let's be clear, Nietzsche was not an advocate for repression. He did not believe in swallowing emotions or playing passive. He believed in expressing your truth, but only when it is your own, fully formed, and born from struggle. Until then, silence. In fact, Nietzsche once wrote that he who cannot remain silent does not know how to speak. In other words, true communication, true impact, comes only after one has mastered the art of withholding. Just like a warrior doesn't strike at every opportunity, a wise individual doesn't speak at every chance. Their words, like their actions, are rare and deliberate. Think about the people in your life, or in history, who command real respect. Not fear, not attention. Respect. Chances are, they weren't the loudest in the room. They were the ones who listened, observed, and spoke with precision. That's not a coincidence. It's a psychological reality. We instinctively assign more value to what is scarce, and silence creates scarcity. Silence also introduces another dimension, unpredictability. The one who speaks constantly becomes predictable, easy to read, and often easy to control. But the silent individual holds the cards close. They force others to interpret, guess, and reflect. In a way, they reverse the power dynamic. Instead of reacting to others, they make others react to them. Nietzsche's own life reflected this. Though a prolific writer, he was notoriously reclusive. He often avoided public intellectual battles, choosing instead to put his thoughts into dense, aphoristic texts that required deep interpretation. He wasn't interested in winning arguments. He wanted to shape minds. This refusal to engage in constant noise is itself a form of rebellion. In Nietzsche's time, just as in ours, the herd mentality rewarded those who fit in, who echoed what was popular. Silence was not just a withdrawal. It was a declaration. I do not belong to you. I do not need to explain myself. Of course, silence is not always easy. It can feel uncomfortable, even painful. We speak to fill the void, to avoid awkwardness, to signal our place. But Nietzsche challenges us to confront that discomfort, to sit with it, because that is where self-knowledge begins. In silence, we are alone with our thoughts. And for many, that is terrifying. But for the few who can endure it and grow from it, silence becomes a weapon, a shield, a compass. In this first section, we've only scratched the surface, but we've laid the foundation. Silence is not absence. It is presence amplified. It is a paradox. The less you speak, the more they listen. And in Nietzsche's world of will, strength, and overcoming, it is one of the most potent tricks of power. When people hear the word power, they often imagine it as control over others, political dominance, wealth, physical strength, or social influence. But Nietzsche, ever the iconoclast, turned this concept inside out. For him, true power begins not outwardly, but inwardly. It is not about conquering the world. It is about conquering the self. And silence plays a pivotal role in this conquest. To understand Nietzsche's vision of power, we need to explore one of his core concepts, the will to power. Contrary to what some interpretations suggest, this isn't just a lust for domination. It's the underlying drive in all life to grow, expand, assert, and transcend. Every living thing, Nietzsche argued, has this will to power, not just to survive, but to become more, to overcome limitations, and to impose form and meaning onto a chaotic world. The highest expression of the will to power is self-mastery, the ability to shape oneself, discipline oneself, and become who you truly are without being shaped by the herd. In this light, silence becomes more than a tactic. It becomes a practice of self-governance. Think about this. The person who reacts to every insult, who must explain themselves constantly, who needs to be heard at every opportunity. Is that a powerful person? Or is that someone being controlled by the world around them? Nietzsche would say they are still a slave, not to another person, but to their own instincts, their need for validation, their fear of being misunderstood. That is not power. That is dependency. True power lies in restraint. He writes in Beyond Good and Evil, he who cannot put his thoughts on ice should not enter into the heat of argument. Here Nietzsche is not discouraging debate or the expression of ideas. Quite the opposite. He's emphasizing the need for inner clarity and discipline before one speaks. To put your thoughts on ice is to let them cool, mature, evolve. Only then are they worthy of being shared. Silence, therefore, is not repression, it is incubation. It's how powerful ideas are born. It's how self-awareness deepens. It's how the true self is allowed to emerge, free from the noise and influence of others. This idea aligns with his concept of the Übermensch, the one who creates their own values, who stand apart from society, and who does not seek approval. The Übermensch does not announce their power. They embody it. They walk in silence, and yet the world feels their presence. That is what Nietzsche means by overcoming. And silence is part of that overcoming, of the ego, of the need to be seen, of the urge to react. Nietzsche's contempt for the herd mentality is well known. He believed that most people were content to live passively, adopting values handed to them by religion, society, or tradition. They conform. They seek comfort in sameness. But the powerful individual, the true individual, resist this. They live by inner necessity, not external demand. Silence is a weapon against the herd. While the herd is loud, reactive, gossipy, anxious to speak and be heard, the powerful person is silent, focused, grounded. Their silence creates contrast, and in that contrast, they're set apart. But Nietzsche also understood the danger of isolation. Silence, if not rooted in purpose, can become nihilism, a withdrawal from life. So he warns us, silence must not become emptiness. It must be filled with creation, contemplation, and strength. That's why self-mastery is so essential. There's a moment in Ecce Homo, one of Nietzsche's later works, where he reflects on his solitude. The most silent words are harbingers of the storm. Thoughts that come on doves' feet guide the world. What he's saying is profound. The most powerful ideas do not come through shouting or debate. They arrive in stillness. And yet, these quiet thoughts are what ultimately move the world. This is the paradox of power. The more internal it becomes, the more externally impactful it can be. We can draw a parallel here to the way some of the most transformative figures in history have operated. They weren't necessarily the loudest. Often, they were misunderstood or underestimated. But they were focused, disciplined, and internally driven. Their silence was not absence, it was depth. And depth is rare. In an age where instant opinions and surface-level reactions dominate, depth is revolutionary. And depth is built in silence. Nietzsche would challenge us with this question. Can you sit alone with your own thoughts, without distraction, and not be afraid? Because if you can, you're beginning to walk the path of the powerful. You're beginning to overcome. So how does one cultivate this Nietzschean silence? It begins with awareness. Catch yourself in moments when the urge to speak is impulsive. Ask yourself, why do I feel the need to explain? To defend? To fill the space? Then choose silence. Not as submission, but as strength. Use that silence to reflect, to observe, to plan. In doing so, you start taking control, not of others, but of yourself. And that is the first and perhaps most difficult form of power. Nietzsche did not offer comfort. He offered challenge. He believed that we must forge our own path, even if it means walking alone. Silence, to him, was not retreat. It was confrontation with oneself. And only those willing to face themselves can truly rise. Silence is not just a form of self-mastery. It is a force that reshapes how we interact with others. In relationships, in conflict, in influence, silence becomes a strategic tool. Nietzsche, though not a psychologist in the modern sense, understood this instinctively. He observed that power is rarely taken with noise. It's often seized in the quiet moments, the pauses, the spaces where others expect words and receive none. In those spaces, dynamics shift. When you remain silent in conversation, something fascinating happens. The burden of filling the silence falls on others. They speak more. They reveal more. They start to explain themselves, often unnecessarily. In a negotiation, this is leverage. In conflict, this is disarmament. In relationships, it's magnetism. Silence creates psychological tension, and humans, uncomfortable with tension, rush to relieve it, usually by revealing more than they should. Nietzsche understood this dynamic. He wrote about how most people talk to distract themselves from truth, from discomfort, from inner emptiness. But the silent person, the one who waits, who observes, who doesn't interrupt or explain, is operating on a different level. They are not avoiding discomfort. They are weaponizing it, not to hurt others, but to elevate themselves above emotional impulse. In social life, silence is often misread. People may assume you are aloof, unsure, or shy. But Nietzsche would say that those assumptions only prove how rare and misunderstood true silence is. We've been conditioned to believe that confidence is loud. That influence requires charisma. But the strongest presence in a room is often the quietest. Why? Because true confidence doesn't seek attention, it attracts it. Silence sends a message. It says, I don't need to prove anything. I don't need your approval. I choose when and if I speak. That alone destabilizes those who live on the edge of insecurity. It throws people off. They begin to wonder what you're thinking, what you're planning, why you're not reacting. And in that wondering, they give you power. You control the tempo. In arguments, silence becomes a kind of mirror. When someone expects a reaction and receives none, they are forced to confront their own behavior. It exposes the irrational. It drains the energy from escalation. The more they raise their voice, the more your silence exposes their lack of control. Nietzsche called this the higher discipline, to master one's instincts rather than act from them. In silence, you aren't surrendering. You're rising above. This is not passive aggression. This is presence. Silence from a position of power is completely different than silence from fear. The former commands, the latter retreats. Nietzsche would insist that your silence must come from a place of self-possession. It must say, I've already chosen myself. I don't need to be chosen by you. This has massive implications in love and intimacy. The person who speaks constantly, who needs reassurance, who demands attention, is not standing in strength. They are perhaps unknowingly asking to be validated. But the silent lover, the one who doesn't rush to explain or over-communicate, holds mystery. And mystery is seductive, is the opposite of neediness, is strength wrapped in calm. Nietzsche believed most people speak not from knowledge but from anxiety. And in this anxiety, they betray themselves. They talk to be liked. They argue to be right. They explain to avoid judgment. But in doing so, they give away their position. Their image becomes dependent on others' reactions. The silent person escapes this trap. Even in leadership, silence is a mark of intelligence and emotional depth. Leaders who speak less are heard more. Their words carry weight because they are rare. They don't over-explain, they don't over-promise, and they don't react to every shift in mood or opinion. They speak when it matters, and the room listens. This is the Nietzschean ideal of power, not reactive, but intentional. And consider negotiation. The most effective negotiators are those who use silence not as a stall, but as a signal. When they propose something and then stop talking, that silence becomes uncomfortable. And in trying to break it, the other party often makes concessions. They talk themselves into your terms. The one who can sit in silence the longest usually wins, not because they are manipulative, but because they are composed. They know what they want, and they don't chase. In these situations, silence is not a lack of expression, it is a declaration. It says, I know what I'm worth. I don't need to fill the air to justify it. This is the power Nietzsche pointed to again and again, the ability to exist independently of others' reactions. To speak when you mean to, not when you are compelled to. But silence doesn't mean you disconnect. Quite the opposite. In being silent, you listen more deeply. You observe. You understand nuance. You hear what others miss. And that knowledge is power. Nietzsche believed that the higher individual is one who sees through the surface, who recognizes the drives behind words. You can't do that if you're always talking. When you are silent, you begin to notice things. The way people contradict themselves, the gap between what they say and what they mean, the insecurities hidden behind jokes or bravado. You gain clarity. And with clarity comes influence. Most people are too distracted to gain this insight. They are caught in the current, constantly reacting, but silence takes you out of that current. It puts you on the shore, watching the flow, choosing when to step in. That's where real power lives, not in the noise, but in the stillness between. Nietzsche's idea of silence was never about isolation for its own sake. It was about transformation. Every moment of silence is a moment of building. You're crafting something, yourself. You're shaping how others perceive you, but more importantly, how you perceive yourself. The ability to hold your ground in silence means you are no longer ruled by your impulses. You are ruled by your will. And will is everything. The will to power, in Nietzsche's terms, is the drive to create, to overcome, to elevate. Silence is one of its tools. A weapon for those who are not slaves to emotion, but masters of presence. So the next time you're tempted to speak quickly, to react, to explain, pause. Ask yourself, is this speech born of strength or of fear? If it's fear, wait. Let silence take its place. Not as avoidance, but as affirmation. You are in control. You are becoming the one who chooses. And the one who chooses when to speak, how to act, when to wait, is already ahead. Because silence, when intentional, is not empty. It is full of force, full of focus, full of power. In today's world, the power of silence is more relevant than ever. We live in a culture that rewards speed, instant reaction, and loudness. Social media amplifies every voice, every thought, every moment of outrage or approval. But in that flood of constant noise, something strange happens. We begin to crave stillness. We begin to notice the people who are not speaking. And we wonder, what do they know that we don't? This is where silence becomes a tool not only of personal mastery, but of modern leadership. The most effective leaders today aren't the ones shouting orders or flooding meetings with endless talking points. They're the ones who walk into a room, listen first, speak with clarity, and leave everyone thinking about what they said or what they didn't say. Their silence creates presence. Their restraint builds credibility. Their control earns trust. Think about the most respected leaders you've encountered. Managers, teachers, political figures, mentors. Chances are they didn't dominate conversations. They observed. They asked questions. And when they spoke, it mattered. Nietzsche would say this is not accidental. It's a sign of inner strength. It's someone who does not speak from ego, but from conviction. And conviction, when paired with silence, is explosive. In leadership, silence also signals patience. In a world addicted to immediate gratification, the ability to pause, to wait before speaking, before deciding, before reacting, is rare. It shows maturity. It shows that you're not being driven by urgency, but by purpose. It creates space for others to show who they are, and for you to act with intention rather than impulse. And yet, many fear silence. They see it as awkward. They fill meetings with unnecessary talk just to avoid it. But true leaders use silence like a sculptor uses a chisel, cutting away the excess to reveal what matters. In this sense, silence becomes not a lack, but a form of expression. It shapes how people experience your presence. It builds tension, and in communication, tension creates impact. In personal relationships, silence is often misunderstood. People assume that to connect, we must talk constantly. But that's not connection. That's often just noise. Real intimacy happens in presence. When you can sit with someone in silence and still feel deeply understood, that is power. It's not the words that bind people. It's the space between them, the shared quiet that says, we don't need to perform. We just are. Nietzsche would argue that most communication is performance. People say what they think they're supposed to say. They speak not to express, but to protect themselves from discomfort. But when you're truly powerful, you no longer perform. You speak because you choose to, not because you're afraid not to. Silence is also an incredible tool in conflict. Most arguments spiral out of control, not because of what is said, but because of how quickly it is said. Emotions flare, voices rise, and soon either side is listening. But the person who pauses, who waits, who lets silence hang in the air, can instantly change the dynamic. That silence de-escalates. It signals confidence. It puts the burden of reaction on the other person. And more often than not, they will crack first. This is not about manipulating others. It's about breaking the chain of reactivity. Nietzsche believed in going beyond instinct. The herd reacts. The higher individual chooses. Silence gives you the space to make that choice, to act from strength instead of weakness. Consider the power of silence in persuasion. A good speaker knows when to pause. They know that silence is rhythm, and rhythm is influence. When you speak with constant volume and speed, people tune out. But when you introduce silence, they lean in, they anticipate. You create contrast, and contrast makes your words hit harder. This works even more powerfully when you're not speaking at all. In interviews, negotiations, debates, the person who stays calm and silent controls the energy of the room. Others fill the silence, often revealing more than they meant to. This is not a trick. It's simply the natural response to discomfort. And if you're comfortable with silence, you win. This applies even in creative work. Writers, artists, designers, those who produce at a high level, often describe the need for silence, both external and internal. Silence is the space where ideas are born. It is the place where distractions fall away and insight emerges. Nietzsche himself worked in solitude, often walking alone in the mountains, letting silence fill his thoughts before translating them into words. He understood that silence isn't just for retreat. It's for incubation. In silence, we confront ourselves. We face our doubts, our desires, our chaos. And from that confrontation, something new can be created. Power is not just imposed. It is built in silence, in solitude, in the deep chambers of the self where no one else can see. In professional settings, silence can even serve as a boundary. When you don't respond to every email, every opinion, every challenge, you signal that your attention is valuable. You're not accessible at all times. You choose when and how you engage. That silence isn't rude. It's selective. It's a statement of worth. The person who is always available, always reacting, always talking, eventually becomes background noise. But the person who steps back, who waits, who appears only when necessary, that person is noticed. Their silence becomes scarcity, and scarcity is valuable. Nietzsche didn't live in the age of smartphones or social media, but his ideas feel designed for it. If he could see how we've built a world where everyone has a voice, but few have anything to say, he would ask, what is all this noise hiding? And more importantly, who benefits from our constant distraction? He would remind us that power isn't just about being heard. It's about being unshakable, being able to stand alone, in silence, in stillness, in thought, and not be swallowed by fear. To Nietzsche, this is what separates the herd from the creator, the follower from the master. So how do you use this today? You start by practicing silence. In meetings, wait longer before speaking. In conversations, listen more than you talk. In conflict, don't react, observe. Let others reveal themselves. In relationships, stop performing. Just be. In your personal life, create space for thought. Log out, sit in the quiet, and see what comes up. At first, it will feel strange, unnatural, even painful. That's how conditioned we are to fill every second with noise. But stay with it, because beneath the discomfort, there's clarity, there's power. There's a version of you that doesn't need validation, doesn't need attention, doesn't need to constantly explain itself. That version of you is the one Nietzsche was calling toward. Not the louder version, the deeper one, the one who walks silently, but carries the storm inside. There comes a moment in every person's life when they begin to realize that the noise around them is not helping them grow. It's keeping them small. Every opinion, every argument, every expectation becomes a chain, a leash, a barrier to becoming something more. And in that moment, silence no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like freedom. Nietzsche's entire philosophy leads to this point. He wasn't interested in comfort. He didn't believe in giving people easy answers. What he wanted was transformation, a complete evolution of the self. To strip away what was borrowed, inherited, conditioned, and replace it with something original, something forged through fire, through solitude, through silence. He believed that to become truly powerful, you must first become terrifyingly alone. Alone with your thoughts, alone with your doubts, alone with your truth. And silence is what makes that possible. Because when you stop talking, when you stop reacting, when you stop filling the void, you meet yourself. Not the version others see, but the one behind a mask. Most people never reach that place. They're too afraid. The silence feels too deep, too sharp. It threatens to expose things they'd rather not face. In that way, noise becomes a drug, a way to escape the self. But the individual who walks the path of silence, voluntarily, courageously, is the one who begins to transform, not just on the surface, but from the inside out. Nietzsche called this process becoming who you are, not finding yourself, not choosing yourself, but becoming. A verb, a continual act of creation. And that becoming cannot happen in the presence of constant distraction. It requires stillness, space, silence. That's why silence, at its core, is creative. It is not about retreating from the world, but re-entering it as something new, something dangerous. Because when you have faced yourself in silence, when you have confronted your fears, questioned your beliefs, examined your motives, nothing outside of you can hold power over you anymore. Not opinions, not insults, not rejection. You've already gone deeper than all of it, and you came back stronger. This is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of the Übermensch, the higher individual. Not someone with power over others, but power over themselves. A person who does not just repeat culture, but reshapes it. A person who does not beg for understanding, but stands with such presence that understanding becomes irrelevant. That is the power of silence. It is the birthplace of the sovereign self. But Nietzsche also warned, this path is not for everyone. Most will choose the herd, the comfort of being surrounded by noise. They will call silence weakness, or arrogance, or isolation. But in truth, it is the most demanding form of strength. It requires faith in yourself, in your voice, in your timing. It requires letting go of the need to always be seen, always be heard, always be right. And that is terrifying until it becomes liberating. So what does it look like to live this way in practical terms? It looks like speaking only when you mean it, choosing words with precision, letting people talk without needing to interrupt or dominate, holding your ground in conflict, not by shouting louder, but by standing still, not explaining your choices when you know they're right, being comfortable not being understood by everyone. It looks like building time into your life where no one else's voice enters. No news, no scrolling, no commentary, just silence, not as escape, but as a return, back to your own thoughts, back to your vision, back to your will. It looks like slowing down before you speak, letting silence sit in conversations, watching how others respond, listening for what is not being said, giving your words value by not giving them away too easily. It looks like learning to enjoy your own company, to walk alone, to think deeply, to see the beauty in being off the grid, not as rebellion, but as sovereignty. You don't need to be everywhere. You just need to be where you are completely. This is what separates the strong from the weak, the loud from the impactful, the echo from the origin. And make no mistake, silence will cost you. It will make some people uncomfortable. It will make others misinterpret you. It will take longer to be understood, but it will also make you powerful. Not because others say so, but because you feel it, because you know who you are and who you're not pretending to be. That power is invisible, but it radiates. It's in how you enter a room, in how you carry yourself, and how people lean in when you do speak, because they know you don't speak lightly. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." Silence helps you find your why. It strips away the noise, the false goals, the borrowed dreams. It forces you to confront what actually matters to you, not to your followers, not to your family, not to your culture, but to you. And once you find that why, you no longer need approval. You no longer chase arguments. You no longer fear solitude. You become quiet, not because you are unsure, but because you are certain. And from that silence, everything else flows. Your words, your actions, your presence. This is not a trick. It's not a hack. It's a way of being, a state of inner clarity that makes external validation irrelevant. Nietzsche wasn't giving advice. He was lighting a path, a brutal, beautiful path, toward becoming untouchable from within. So if you feel overwhelmed by the noise, if you feel stretched thin by the need to be everywhere and explain everything, start here. Start with silence. Not as a retreat, but as a strategy, as strength, as an act of power in a world addicted to reaction. Because the truth is this: in a room full of people shouting to be heard, the one who says nothing often has the most to say. Walk quietly, think deeply, speak rarely, and when you do speak, speak with fire.